Are you keeping up with the latest in workplace health and safety in Australia? Psychosocial safety is now more important than ever, with new regulations emphasising the duty of care to prevent psychological harm. Join us on the 29th of August for a rapid-fire webinar hosted by two FlourishDX experts as we tackle these pressing challenges and pave the way for future best practices in psychosocial safety. Gain insights on beyond engagement surveys by learning how to more accurately quantify psychosocial risks. Discover strategies for improving the governance of psychosocial safety. Understand how to provide ongoing monitoring of psychosocial hazards and the effectiveness of controls. And determine the prerequisites for empowering line managers to take ownership of psychosocial safety. This webinar is a must for any health and safety or HR professional dedicated to creating a safer, more productive work environment. Don't miss out on this vital opportunity. Register now to ensure your organisation takes the lead in psychosocial safety. Visit www.flourishdx.com to register. See you there. Now on to this episode.
From FlourishDX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hello and welcome to the UK Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Peter Kelly and I've got with me my lovely co-host, Kate. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Peter. All good, glad it's nearly the end of the week, but thoroughly looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, this is one that we've just been chit-chatting on WhatsApp and throwing things out and then having, those almost an existential experience, really, isn't it? To sort of, discover what we're talking about when we come to psychosocial risk and stress and all of that stuff. So yeah, this is a geek out for those of you who are listening. We will geek out.
We will. We're sorry. We'll try and make it accessible as well. But yeah, we had a bit of a preamble yesterday. We got very carried away.
Yeah. And then I think we can thank the government for training our brains to be so intuitively looking at things and asking all the very difficult questions that need to be asked. But yeah, I just I don't know if you've seen my post, Kate. Did you see this post I did?
I did, yes.
Oh, so I wrote a post where I said I think what we're doing is we're focusing on the outcome. So stress is an outcome of poorly managed workplace hazards, and those hazards are psychosocial. But in the UK, as we know, for the last 30 years, when we refer to people experiencing mental health issues at work, we often refer to work. We will refer to work-related stress or stress. There are other countries that refer to it entirely different, don't they, Kate?
They do. There are those more maybe forward-thinking countries that actually do talk about psychosocial risks. I know.
Forward-thinking. Why do you think we've got ourselves into this situation where we look at stress, which will be an outcome, because it's as we know, the definitions, one of those is a perceived inability to achieve a desired goal. There's a disconnect between what people are getting and what happens in work. But actually, if we were to take a sidestep and have a look at why do you think psychosocial risk hazards is now becoming part of the liturgy? It's a great word, isn't it? The liturgy of business. Yeah. You can't say good Lord after liturgy. Although they're wholly appropriate, I'm saying.
I mean, there are layers to this. I think a lot of it comes down to research and understanding. We've known for a long time that there is a problem with the way we work that causes us harm to particularly our mental health. But we haven't had sufficient and robust enough evidence to really understand what that is and what that looks like. So if we think about if we take it and compare it to physical safety, if we think about something like asbestos, we knew for quite a long time there was probably a problem with asbestos, but we couldn't really say exactly what it was. There seemed to be a link between asbestos and some sort of maybe potential forms of cancer or other lung diseases, but there wasn't a direct cause. And if you think back to asbestos, it was years and years of research and lobbying before we started to get that change. And I think we're on that journey with psychological health and safety. You know, we were lucky in the UK because I think we started that, but it's only 20 years old, and that for Pete and I that have been doing it that long, it feels like forever. But actually, 21 years. All right, so actually that's still quite new in the context of understanding risk and getting industries, the profession, to really address it and tackle it in the right way.
Yeah. I mean, the management standards for work-related stress was that because at the time, that is how we framed it. We framed it around outcomes, the risks, what were the things that you needed to do something about, which is it. So the question set that we used, demands, control, role, relationship, support, and change, came from the best available evidence that was around at the time, that these factors in work might influence people's potential outcome of work-related stress, e.g., the hazards become potential, risk factors, and that was the evidence. Karasek, Burrell, Edwards, a little bit Greenberg, organisational injustice, and what we didn't have at that time, and I'm interested, because we had this discussion yesterday, was actually we didn't in the tool look at duration and frequency.
Yeah. So no, I mean you're right. I think in terms of the in terms of the management systems, we did talk about. It's my memory really completely missed. So we did talk about doing risk assessment. That was very clear actually as one of the key steps within that management approach. I think the challenge that we have is that by and large we are terrible at doing risk assessments. I think we're pretty poor at it in terms of physical safety, if I'm honest, and we have really, really struggled to translate it into other health issues, and then particularly psychological health and safety, because I don't think we have the depth of understanding and the maturity. So I actually think it's a more fundamental issue about risk assessment, because if I think about all the, and you're the same, Pete, probably hundreds and hundreds of risk assessments I've looked at over the years, hardly any of them cover frequency or duration.
But they do cover severity, don't they, and consequences.
Yeah, our little 5x5 matrix, high, medium, and low. Yeah, without any context. And I think this. Oh no, I won't get sidetracked, but too sidetracked.
Oh
this,
no,
but
please get. We got loads of time. Even we said
this is why I think this is one of the reasons why health and safety gets such a bad rap, because we don't do the work to really understand the risk. We go, "Ooh, this is bad. This could be a really nasty outcome, or we better stop it at all costs," without actually understanding, well, the duration or the frequency of that risk is so low and so minimal. We don't actually, we can have processes when it comes up and dealing with it, but we can't, it's not about stopping it. So yeah, I'm completely going to go on my soapbox about this, Pete.
No, I think, but this is the thing. If you look at severity and consequences, we're looking at outputs again. We're looking at how bad and what were the consequences of how bad it was. Which when you're looking at physical, say some of your physical hazards, like the lack of a guarding on on a site where you've got a deep hole, the severity and the consequences are there if someone falls in, don't they? You know what I mean? Or if you don't have the right, you have a fault on a scaffolding rig, or you have, someone going up on ladders and they're not secured in. There's a very obvious link between well, why did you do that? And how many times has it been gone? Why did you do that? That was, but and they'll go, I don't know. And you're like, okay, but you did. And they went, yeah, I know. And would you do it again? No. But so it's because obviously the severity and the consequence are not immediately known until after the accident occurs anyway. But in the context of mental health, and particularly psychological health, when we're talking about, we have an abundance now of research that says poorly managed workplaces make people ill. I would say we have more research than when we did asbestos or semiconductors.
Occupational dermatitis, one of my it sounds small, but actually really impactful. Wouldn't necessarily kill anyone, but does end people's careers.
Yeah, hand down vibration through lack of maintenance of the drills and timings and everything else. I mean, I don't know. I once was on a site and there was two gentlemen there, around about 50. They'd been drillers, diamond core drillers for about 25 years, and they were constantly doing it. And I said, you know how long you're supposed to before you have a break? He went, yeah, half an hour. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, your machines are maintained. He went, yeah. He said, we don't do half an hour. I said, because I can't feel anything anyway, so I'll stop after 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And I had a young apprentice with us, the young apprentice there. I said, if you were his age, what would you say to him now? He said, I'd say stop, make the breaks, look after you, because he said, I can't hold a pen. I've got a granddaughter, and I can't feel when I've got in my hands. And for me, it was that kind of. So there was this really obvious risk and these obvious things, and still, people hadn't done it. But then when look at go on, Kate, go on, Kate.
I think, look, you're preaching to the converted here, and I think with health issues, and I think perhaps even more so with psychosocial risk, is there is still this fundamental issue that people don't think it will happen to them because there is this gap potential. Well, we'll come back to psychosocial risk, but actually no, it's a good example, because one of the things I was going to refer to in this discussion, and I'll use it now, is the data from the research that was done by the World Health Organization and the ILO, International Labour Organization, looking at fatalities associated with long working hours. And it's the same with other sort of health issues, that people are exposed for a prolonged period of time, often years and years and years, but the outcome of that exposure is not connected with the work they're doing at the time. So the research from the ILO and WHO's found very clearly that for people who regularly work 55 hours or more a week, they are significantly more likely to drop dead of a heart attack.
Welcome to Whitehall too.
But again, that's over a period of time. It doesn't. You're unlikely to have 1 week of working 55 hours and have a heart attack the next week, which is why understanding duration and frequency does become so important, because like a lot of these health issues, it is that duration and exposure over time that becomes problematic. So again, a single exposure to a high stress, high pressure, excessive pressure situation by itself is not going to be a problem. We're designed to cope with it, so that deadline, just coming up to budget season, so it's all going to be very intense for a few weeks. That's okay, because it's manageable in that time. It will be a bit more intense, but then there'll be a rebalancing and a recalibrating. But if you're not looking at how often that repeats, how much time have people to recover, looking at what underlying other issues there may be, then you're going to completely miss the harm that's being done. And therefore, any risk assessment is going to be ineffective because you're not looking at those issues.
It is an analysis, isn't it? I mean, When the World Health Organization came out 10 years ago and said, we believe that cardiovascular disease due to depression and anxiety was the biggest killer in 2050, they've now come out and reviewed that, and they've increased that date down. And I'm within that 16 year, so I'm 57, am I, all being well, I get another 16 years. But the point being is, we know from the World Health Organization, we know from ILO, that's in the International Labour Office, or office or organization, International Labour Organization, that actually the evidence is there. But we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Now, are we not doing it? I'm taking me back to my original point. Are we not doing it because we're focusing on the end point and not the precursors that are going before? I want more than a year. I want more than a year.
Again, we're poor at doing risk assessment and root cause analysis. So, and really unpicking what the issues are. I think it's time. I think it's competency. I think there is concern and fear around the subject, that because we're looking at individuals. And of course, in this mix, we've still got the issue about, well, what's work related and what's individual exposure. But to be honest, that I'll be on. Oh, I'm going to upset our audience here. That really annoys me. That because we have the same discussion with vibration or noise, and we are able to effectively separate what is a work-related exposure and therefore understand the risk from a work point of view, and understand that there may be additional things outside of work which might change the risk profile for that individual, but we can assess what the work-related risks are. And I do believe we can do the same for psychosocial risk. And I think it's a question, and this is one of the reasons why I like 45,003, because it gives a list. In my mind, it gives nearly 3 pages, 3 tables, nearly 3 pages of individual kind of hazards, which you can work through. If you're struggling to think, what do I need to look at? It gives you a list of what you need to look at and what you need to think about. A very good list. Yes, it is a very good list, Pete.
A very good list that took a very long time to get them in there to do that. But here's the thing: when we were developing ISO 45003, 74 countries, over 200 people on that committee, there was relative consensus on some things. What was interesting was people's definitions of psychosocial risk and psychosocial hazards, and it really took a long time for a lot of conversations about, oh, well, is it a hazard? Is it a risk? Well, and actually, I'm going to put it to you in your best BSI voice, because I've seen you do this on video. Define the difference between a psychosocial hazard and a psychosocial risk, and then I'll see if I agree with you.
Oh my goodness me! I always go back, and when I start this, I always think, oh, electricity. So that the hazard, electricity is the hazard. The risk is the potential outcome. So electrocution or fire, in simple terms. So when we think of, I'm just thinking what would be a good psychosocial one to use. That's bullying. Bullying. It's an easy one.
It's not really easy, but it affects about 9% of the working population. So it's quite. Actually, it's going up, by the way. Sorry, a bit of geeking out a bit. There you go.
It is. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to maybe looking at how we maybe talking about actually how people can look at risk assessment within organisations and hierarchy and where you'd start. So bullying would be the hazard, and then the risk might be it might be work related stress or burnout, but it's more likely to be something like maybe anxiety. There might be a lead up to that, so there might be other symptoms associated with it, so sleeplessness, those sorts of things. But the hazard would be the bullying. The risk would be the bullying, and then no, sorry everyone. You've got the hazard is bullying, and then the risk is the outcome that comes out of that. Stress might be one of the outcomes. Anxiety might be another. Depression might be another. So that's the outcome. Did I get it right, Pete?
You did get it right, which I'm very thankful for, because actually the questions we chose in the management standards were hazards. We then put a RAG assessment, red, amber, green, to indicate those where you might want to consider that they're becoming a risk. So it kind of achieved that, but at the time the environment wasn't open to us going, we want to do a psychosocial risk assessment. They would have looked at it and gone, what? And I mean, they used to go, what, when we talked about stress, ironically, and you remember those days, and early 2000s when you're going to look at stress, you're going to try and look at work related stress. Well, all these people are coming into work, and I said, yeah, they're coming into work, but you don't stop them using a machine just because they're going through a divorce. It's the for me, it's been always yeah, but what about home factors? Well, home is life. We bring home in. It's what we do when we're in work and how we manage it. If you've got someone who's gone through a bereavement or who's going through a divorce, then a good manager might have to I'm going to have to keep an eye on this person, check out what I can do. What are they doing there? They're mitigating the risk by identifying a hazard. And actually, for me, I think the conversation, and this is where we're going to be going for the next sort of 20 minutes, is how do we change the narrative from risk to hazards? And how do we get, that's a very useful descriptor of what the risk is and what the hazards are. They're both equally important. It's just at the moment, if we continue to look at the output of not looking at the way jobs are designed, Kate's writing something down. Could be serious. It could be serious. He's got a thought process coming on here. And now I'm going to get asked the question. That's not the rules. So yeah, how do we do that? How do we? Because I've probably for the last 20 years talked about stress, talked about psychosocial, and talked with them in comfort and felt comfortable about talking about it. I have seen blind eyes in front of me, though, when I've talked about psychosocial. They go, what's that? But they did, mind you, we did the same for asbestos, didn't we?
And all health, and I think all health issues. I think it's the same. And what I was writing down, and I think this, which is key to where we're going with the direction of this, is that if we really understand the hazard, it becomes much easier to use and look at duration and frequency to do an accurate assessment of risk. See, it was important to write down. It was a very important point, because if we think about something like, well, I use the example bullying. I mean, it's probably not the best example, because if there's bullying going on, it's probably systemic in some way. But for argument's sake, and I suppose if we crossed over from bullying into something like
excessive demands.
No, I didn't want to go. No, I didn't want to go. I was thinking more like dealing with aggressive customers in retail or A&E or something. So, in that circumstances, there might be a confrontation, some verbal exchange, maybe some physical violence. That might be slightly different, but maybe some verbal abuse. But if that only happens, once a year, and it's fairly minimal, somebody swears at somebody and walks off, on its own it will have an impact at the moment, but it's unlikely to cause a negative outcome. But if it happens every day, several times a day, then that frequency and duration starts to become the risk factor, and you start to understand that risk. So I think it is really critical, and so we do need to help or people doing risk need to focus on the hazard, then it's easier to look at the duration and frequency.
That is it. That's it. That's 100% thing, isn't it? And this is why we'll come back to this. But this is one of the things when we do standard matrix for risk, the severity, the consequence, the high, low, and everything else, and then we go and we try and apply that to psychological health and safety. That it doesn't work. I mean, but for me, it doesn't always work.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So how do we then look at how we present these matrix with frequency and duration? Because I've got some ideas, but I'm interested to see what you say first so I can rob what you've said.
I want to hear what you said if you thought about it. I suppose fundamentally, if you're understanding and doing the duration and frequency effectively, you can give yourself a high, medium, and low. So the example that I just said about in terms of a retail worker being abused, then actually if you look at it, the frequency and certainly frequency and to a certain extent duration is significant, and therefore the risk of a negative outcome is actually quite high, and the statistics back that up if you look at issues. So I do think you can relate the two. I think that, so I'll be really interested to see how you're going to approach this, because the challenge that I think again we see in health and safety is that people feel really nervous about making a judgment about that outcome, so that I can't remember, the number of times I've had a conversation with somebody going, oh, well, if they fall off the bottom rung of a ladder, they might not be hurt, or if they land badly, they could die. Well, yes, they could, but what realistically, if somebody comes off at the bottom rung of a ladder, are they likely to die? No. They're likely to have probably some musculoskeletal damage, some bruising, a bit of soreness. If they're older and they've got osteoporosis, they may break something. But realistically, so I think again that's one of the challenges we have in the profession. So how are you going to solve it, Pete? What's the answer?
No, I'm not solving it. I think everything you've said is wonderful, in complete agreement. I'm just wondering whether or not we take severity and consequence and we put duration and frequency at the top. And then down the side, high, medium, and low. I'm wondering in that situation, what we might actually begin to see is your ambers and reds and greens being a lot more clearer, because there's in most risk assessments, there's an assumption you know what the risk is. And you're doing the assessment, and it's based and actually what you're doing is you're making an analysis of the situation that's there. Whereas we need severity, we do need consequences. That's what the insurance companies are very keen on. What's the consequence of an accident occurring, and how likely is the severity? But they've never really looked at that from a mental health perspective and gone, okay, because actually severity and consequence is something that occurs further down the track. What could be contributing to that is poor workplace and poorly managed workplaces. And then to answer your question about those people that have got a pre-existing things going on at home, they've always had them and they always will. It doesn't therefore mean we shouldn't be doing anything about it. It was like, well, we've always got asbestos, correct? Well, it's everywhere. So what do? We have to
What's
do.
the background level? 0.0001 or whatever it is.
Yeah. What's your, your OELs, occupational exposure limits, and your and that, in the context of psychosocial hazards, you could have long-term multiple exposure to a number of hazards, but you might have, here's the interesting thing, you might have mitigating things in there that help to reduce the probability that that comes.
Well, no, I mean, I think again that's a key part of risk assessment, isn't it? Because you kind of you have to understand the hazard and the risk, and then you look at the mitigation. So coming back to the working hours piece, and I went out for a walk at lunchtime, so I was thinking about this and how we could use it. So if we think about working hours, actually an organisation should be preventing those excessive working hours, and maybe we'll loop round to that. But a mitigation for working hours is vacation time. But if people aren't taking vacation time because work's so busy, or there's a culture of not taking it, then that mitigation, which might help, is being undermined. So yeah, you do need to understand.
You've got to design workplaces that put into their mitigating factors. We have to realize that actually the 24/7 connectivity that we have on these, didn't exist 25 years ago. We were looking at it and going, "Oh dear, we've got 9 million people off with work-related stress." This is, I remember I had one of the first Blackberries, and I was stunned that I could make a call and get emails. Little did I know what the future would hold.
Yeah, I mean, I think and again, I was pondering this. I think one of the things, if we think about excessive work hours, in particular, as an example, and using vacation time as a way of recharging. If you think about your phone, when you first get it and it runs out of charge, you recharge it, and then it keeps its charge for a long time. But over time, it keeps that full charge for less and less and less, because actually the underlying systems within the phone are deteriorating. And that's what happens with people again, is that actually, again, it's not that first 55-hour week, or the second or the third. It's not necessarily the first year of doing 55-hour weeks. But that time that recovery helps somebody keep going, but the duration that they're recovering from, and then what's happening in the body, is the system's becoming weaker and weaker, which is why you suddenly have that after maybe 20 or 30 years of excessive hours. You suddenly have that moment when somebody has a heart attack, and so understanding that, and then thinking about then backwards what your mitigation and your controls are, become really important. So actually, how often are people working excessive hours? How often are people taking their full quota of leave? How often are they paying out or asking for overtime? There are really some of it's really easy metrics.
What if we put mitigation in as an additional component of the risk assessment? It's like the fountain of youth ready. It's just there, isn't it? But we've all gone, oh, and I'm like, actually, we have viewed mental health in the context of work as separate bits of something. We're not seeing them as one continuum or one actual thing. And actually, making jobs good for people, or designing jobs in the best way they can be designed so they don't cause harm. Let's use the word harm. But recognizing that they are a hazard, they're not yet a risk, but they might potentially be a risk. But actually acknowledging what's the mitigations, what are the things that we put in place would do. What 45,003 is giving you a list of things that potentially you can use to mitigate. But it's not exhaustive. There are other lists. There is actually local knowledge that you have in the groups that you work in, what will work in to improve people's workplaces.
And I have to say, just to signpost to people on that, the stuff that's coming out of Australia from WorkSafe on some of this is really good. I think is accessible. But then to be honest, we had there was some really good stuff in the management system. I've still got the slides under each of the elements. So control, I've got the do's and the don'ts. It's really simple. It was there.
Well, that's in I think that's in HSD 48 or 62. So if you want to contact us offline on DM, we'll send you the link. But yeah, it was it was our first attempt at doing a management system. Remember, we were doing a management system before IT was the primary distributor of work. It was only just starting to come in. I remember, when you were visiting engineering firms in 2000, and then by 2005, the entire processes that were done by humans have been taken over, and then we started getting, oh my word, an increase in musculoskeletal disorders and other things like that, because we didn't really design workplaces. We designed systems and didn't think what the consequences of the workplaces, which is a lovely analogy to come right back to where we were, which is actually the thing. What we need to be able to do is to say to people, look at mental health, and I'm thinking abstractly now, as a continuum, almost like an arch, and nicely put by the World Health Organization on prevent, promote, protect, support. As we know, about 10 years ago, we all got called, well, about 12 years ago now, got called into a meeting to say, how do we tackle mental health at work? And that was one of the things that was, that was a precursor to the integrated model that came out. But how do we get that into the worker's psyche? How do we change the perspective? We can't. Stress always has to be about the individual.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think partly it's time and consistency of message. I mean, you made the points that I think because people have talked about stress, we talk about stress risk assessments, and that is one of the big problems, because then you see, and I see this time and time again in organisations. They say, "Oh yes, we do individual stress risk assessments once somebody's become ill," and it's like, well, that's completely missing the point. So I do think
it's like doing individual risk assessment when you had a degloving on a lathe 3 times. You do something straight away after the first time someone's fingers got caught.
Well, you do the risk assessment before and put on guarding.
That would be the perfect scenario. But obviously then after that you'd go, oh, we need to put a guardian on the machine.
But I mean, we chatted about this, and I know that the term psychosocial is not very easy and not very accessible, but it is the right term, and I think it helps underline that these are specific hazards and there is a specific risk. And one of the things that in my day job, and this is not about promoting it, but in the day job, where we are going out and auditing organizations, if they want to get certification, one of the things that is written into the guidance that the auditors have to look for is that whilst an organization might term their processes a stress risk assessment or a well-being assessment, which I also see used because somehow it's a little maybe potentially more accessible. The training that our auditors have been given is that the organisation has to demonstrate, including line managers and senior managers, that they are aware and have some concept around psychosocial risk, because that is they are the hazard and that is the risk. If you want to give it a slightly fluffier title for day-to-day communication, completely get it. But if you dumb it down, then what you're going to do is exactly what we'll be talking about, which is completely actually miss the fundamental hazard and the risk.
And that's one of the reasons when I was doing inspection, I'd say, have you got any risk assessments? And they'd say, yes, we have. Have you got any wellbeing surveys? And they went, yes, you have. Was everyone happy in the wellbeing survey? No. I said, what did you do about the 30% that weren't happy? Because they are now people that have been identified as a possible risk because their exposure to the hazard. And they kind of looked at each other and went, oh, well, we just thought we were checking if people are happy. And I said, well, but if you're going to do a wellbeing survey, some people aren't going to be happy, and therefore you've got to do something about it. And in terms of the understanding of the concept of psychosocial, it's those, in terms of the psychological aspect, it's those things that potentially could cause you distress in work if they're not controlled, aren't they? That's the psychological stuff. Or may make you anxious. But the social stuff is, what is it? If you're subject to bullying, there might be consequences to that. If you're isolated and ostracized, there will be consequences to that. If you've got a sociopathic manager, there will be consequences to that. But here's the interesting thing, and I know that similar guidance will be coming out in Australia. In the Equality Act in the UK, vicarious liability exists. That you're responsible to protect your people. So if you don't think you're going to have a problem under the Health and Safety at Work, though, you will under the Equality Act because you've got to protect people. But I think that analysis, of what a hazard is and what a risk, we could go on, but I'm not going to go on because it's just like. Or maybe we'll go on. Maybe we'll go on for another 5 minutes because it's just one of those like. But I think we're kind of. Hopefully, what we're getting to is a consensus perspective, which is how we promote it, how we push it, what it looks like, are important in whether or not people uptake it. Yeah, but in doing that, we need to hold on to the integrity of the risk assessment, which is tell me how bad it is and how often and when. And the severity and the consequences. You go off sick, you go off with depression or anxiety. You don't, because you're managing the hazards before they've gone.
Yeah, I do think. Yeah, I mean, we were saying about agreeing, arriving at consensus. We started with consensus, but yeah, I think.
But for the purpose of this podcast, we had to lie. We didn't have a consensus somewhere in the middle of it.
I think it's fundamental. If we're going to do it effectively, then effective risk assessments that are preventative are the key. If we don't get that right, then we're not going to have any. We're not going to make any meaningful impact.
Yeah, and just get rid of this whole concept that they're coming into work ill, because they are. Bringing yourself into work 100% means you bring everything in and you manage that when it's in the workplace. Yeah. It's like, well, it's not work's responsibility, but you're still letting them do a whole load of jobs that have risk attached to them. Do you stop it?
Yeah, and again, I think this is something that we do. Whether it's fatigue or if somebody's got a health condition and they're taking medication. We do have processes in physical health and safety that is designed to take that into account. So if somebody's taken a medication that makes them drowsy, then they shouldn't be operating machinery. So an organisation should have processes in place. The same with fatigue or other aspects. So again, I don't think this is so fundamentally different to what we do in the normal day job. I think I think there's some sort of barrier. we get worried about mental health and we can't make this leap across. And from an individual point of view, we have in legislation we have to understand that there are some groups that might have a different risk exposure. So young workers, new and expectant mothers, again, no different. So, the fact that, there may be groups who have a different risk exposure from a psychosocial point of view, I don't think it should be that big a leap. I know people struggle with this, and
Well, you're an
probably doing them a
idealist,
disservice.
Kate.
I am. I know.
You're an
I'm sorry.
idealist, and so am I. But do you know what? I'd rather be looking at it, because I honestly, over the last 25 years, there's been many moments where I've gone, why? And it's because there's something about, we sit with the excuses, and we take the excuses, and we don't look for solutions. And if we don't look for solutions, we never move on. And we haven't got the time and capacity now not to look for solutions. We've hit a crisis point. We're going to continue hitting that crisis point unless we fundamentally, do that check. And that's one of the things about the new legislation in Australia, which we've seen, is actually making people see what the psychosocial hazards and work. I sat at that conference, the inaugural UK, the inaugural Psych Health and Safety Conference, excuse me, and I was actually quite emotional, because there were these companies just getting up and they were telling their story, and I sat back and thought, yes, we're just starting. And you know why that's happening, though? Because they've got legislation which is there, and that's a whole new subject piece. But I was really, really, I just felt, what, the last 25 years haven't been a waste, because maybe we're just on the edges of this, and we can help. This is a global issue. It's a global problem, and we need global solutions, and we need to talk to each other. And we need to realize that actually you can regulate on this. You can do insurance. You can set your insurance policies up to make sure people are doing this. And more importantly, you can do this because it's just the right thing to do. It's just why you want people to go home healthier, or healthy even, than when they turned up. So, oh dear, Kate, we could spend so much time.
I think that feels like a really good place to wrap it up.
It does. And what we'll probably do is do another one of these in 3 months again, and then we can talk to you about some interesting things that are happening in the UK. Hopefully, in 3 months from now, and in particular, in terms of some standards work that's coming out. I think really that's a mega piece of work, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. It will be, and
just tempting people. We're not going to say what yet, but there's something very interesting, and it'll very positive.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. And it'll be, if it comes out and it's right, I think it'll be equivalent to ISO 45003. Oh, and by the way, Whisperer, I hear that it maybe at some stage in the future we might be sort of like looking at ISO 45003 with the view to making it a defined standard. Now, I don't know if that's just hearsay, but I'll leave that for the listeners as well. Wouldn't that change the landscape?
Well, it would. Yeah, that would make that would be another step change. Getting it, the first one, guidance out there was a good step. If it changes in terms of whether it becomes a requirement standard, that would be quite powerful.
Yes. Okay. I didn't dream it then. Right. Okay. So thank you very much, Kate, for spending the last 48 minutes. Easy done. And we'll look forward to doing another podcast with you shortly. We've got a couple of people lined up, some really interesting podcast guests. Looking forward to that. So it just leaves me to end with, please look at your various different podcast options that you have, either listening to us on YouTube or Apple or Amazon. Oh, not Amazon. Sorry, what's the Android version? Well, anyway.
Oh, there are lots. There are lots of Android ones.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and that's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me as well.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychhealthandsafety.com.